G'day folks, thanks for tuning in. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to get started with oil paints in the miniature painting hobby. We'll be covering paints, brushes, palettes, thinners and cleaners, as well as a few extras. Whether you're curious about oils or have decided to take the plunge but aren't sure where to start, this video is for you. Let's get started. So we're not going to get very far painting without any paint. Like hobby acrylics, there's a wide variety of oil brands and colours out there, so it can be a bit intimidating at first. But unlike hobby acrylics, the colours are much more standardised across brands, so it's easier to find what you're looking for, if not something close to it. So we've got some examples here. On the right we have Winsor & Newton's Winton range, which is their student grade paint and is perfect for when you're just starting out. Winsor & Newton also have an artist oils range. Those paints are a step up in quality from the Winton for just a few bucks more, and are great if you're looking for something a little more specific or with a bit more punch. Generally, the difference between grades is that artist grade tends to use more pigment and less filler than student grade, so their coverage, texture, and overall pop is going to be stronger. I still use a lot of these today, and if I'm honest, they could make up the bulk of my palette if I had a bit more self-control when it comes to trying and buying new colours. On the left we have Gamblin, which is one alternative to the artist oil, and then we have Williamsburg, which I consider to be a tier above the other lines. Gamblin are good quality paints at a price comparable to the artist oil. They also tend to have some unique colours like this Radiant series that I'm a big fan of. The Williamsburg are also great to work with. They have a real richness to them that I love, but they are more expensive, so I tend to treat myself to these. If you're at that point where you want to try something a bit fancier, then yeah, I really recommend them. In terms of volume, the standard tube size is 37 mils or 1.25 ounces, which is more than 3 times the standard Citadel pot of 12 mils or 0.4 ounces like this one here, and more than twice as much as your typical pot of contrast paint. Prices can vary from around $5 into excess of $60 per tube as of late 2022, depending on the grade and the pigment, but for our purposes most are going to fall into a $5 to $20 range per 37ml tube. So with all that said, where to start? Well, I recommend an appropriately named starter set, like this one from Winsor & Newton. You could pick this up for less than $50 USD at the time of filming, and you'll get 10 colours that cover the fundamentals, and when you factor in mixing, don't be scared, one of these sets will do you for a long time. Now they do tend to change what colours you get, but you can count on a black or white, your primaries, and a few secondaries. Now a quick word on safety. Some oil paints contain metals that are toxic, such as cadmium or lead. These colours are by no means necessary, and you can go your whole painting life without using them. In sets like these, they include cadmium-free alternatives to colours such as in this case cadmium yellow, and you can tell by the use of the word hue in the name. You can also check the back of the tube for any warning labels. In this case there are none. Now if we compare that to this cadmium yellow medium from Williamsburg, you'll notice the lack of the word hue. You'll see a clear warning label, which will vary depending on the regulations in your area. But again, these pigments are by no means required, and it really comes down to your personal preference and your comfort level. Now each one of these tubes is going to last you a very long time. I paint for several hours a day and have done so for quite some time now, and I've yet to come to the bottom of one of these. Now that day will come, but you do get a lot of bang for your buck. A little bit of paint goes a long way, they last a long time on the palette, and later in the video I'll show you a few ways that you can extend their life even further. Another option for starting out is with a set of more colours or of higher quality paint in smaller tubes, like this one from Williamsburg. This set cost about as much as the Winton starter, and does contain cadmium colours as you can see here, but Winsor & Newton do sell their own Winton version of about 20 colours that you can get for less than their 10-pack. While you do get a lot less paint in these sets in terms of volume, at the end of the day we're working with miniatures, so it'll go a long way, and the extra colours might make things easier if you're not yet comfortable mixing. Now you may have noticed that there's a lot of information on the back of these tubes. These squares tell us the opacity of the paint, from transparent to semi-transparent to semi-opaque and finally opaque. Up the top you can see the pigments used in making this particular colour. In this case pigment white number 6 and pigments yellow 175 and 74. This is meant to make it easier to colour match across brands, but I find them to be fairly inconsistent and would only really use them as a rough guide. Some will also show the type of oil used in the mixture, and some paints like the 3 Williamsburg ones here will have a swatch around the top, so you can have an idea of how the paint will look once applied. Once you become more comfortable with oils and want to branch out a bit, you can use this information to identify the kind of colours you want to expand your collection. Now let's take a look at brushes. Like with paint, there's a wide variety of brushes out there, so I find it easier to divide mine up according to function, of which there are 4 categories. Firstly, we have our foundational brushes, then our layering brushes, and our detail brushes, and lastly we have our blending brushes. This may seem like a lot, but oil paint takes really well to synthetic brushes, which means we can do this very cheaply. In fact, I only really recommend sable brushes for blending brushes, and I'll explain why shortly. So what do I mean by foundational brush? If you're coming from acrylics, you probably have some brushes that you use for base coating. Foundational brushes fulfill a similar purpose in that we use a large brush to lay down a large amount of paint in a short space of time, to set the tone or foundation for the rest of our work. Eventually they'll get pretty beat up, but that doesn't mean they're useless. As you can see here, I'm simulating jamming this beat up old brush into all the various nooks and crannies to get our foundational coat down. We're less concerned about the quality of the brush as we are its size and shape. These Royal Langnickel brushes can be purchased in a pack of 30 with a variety of sizes, but really any cheap synthetic brush will do you, and you don't need to spend more than a few cents per on these. New foundational brushes can also be used as a blending brush or even to apply detail. I also like to have a few flat brushes that I've trimmed the edges off to make cheap fill bits. The fill bit shape allows us to layer quickly and efficiently. If you're familiar with dry brushing, this is a similar technique, but due to how well the oils blend, we don't get that chalky, uneven texture. Instead, we get smooth transitions in next to no time at all. Like the rounds, these will get beat up, but they retain their usefulness when dealing with large areas. You can see a fresh one here that I've trimmed the edges off, just using a small pair of scissors. These aren't necessary, but are useful, and provide a nice bridge into our next type of brush, the layering brush. The layering brush allows us to do just that, in a more precise and controllable way. Here I recommend dedicated filbert brushes like this synthetic Princeton Velvet Touch or the Golden Taklon below. Once our foundational layer has been established, we then use these brushes to build highlights or reintroduce shadows using this overbrushing technique. With practice, the edge of the brush can also be used to paint fine lines, making this type of brush quite versatile. These run only a few dollars each and do the bulk of the heavy lifting. You'll be surprised with how good a result you can get from oils with just a few of these brushes alone. But for the smallest details, you want something most hobbyists are already familiar with, the detail brush. Some folks prefer sables for detail, but even this beat up synthetic Golden Taklon holds a fine point once loaded with paint. As you don't have to worry about oil paint drying out on the brush during a session, you can get a lot more out of cheap synthetics. When you're starting out, I recommend either a size 0 or 1 round brush for general detail, but you could go as small as this quadruple 0 Cotman, depending on the scale you're working with and your comfort level. Selecting the right brushes will largely come down to personal preference, which you'll develop with practice. Just get something that'll let you pick out the edges in things like belts, pouches, eyes, and so on. Another option for detail are liner brushes. These are finer, like this 18/0, but have longer bristles which can hold a good amount of paint. This also makes them ideal for pinline washing, which is a technique in which you load the brush with a heavily thin paint, touch it to the finer recesses of the model, such as the joints in the armour, and the capillary action will draw it down into the space, allowing you to create definition without risking your existing brushwork. You also won't get the coffee staining effect that can come with using this technique with acrylics. I kind of prefer liners over rounds due to their versatility, but again your preference may vary. Finally, we have blending brushes. Due to the long working time of oils, we can easily create beautiful blends and transitions using a clean, dry brush, preferably a round one with soft bristles. For this reason, I recommend sable brushes, though really any clean, dry brush will do. Here I have two old sables, a Winsor Newton Series 7 and a Raphael 8404, both of which have seen better days. Rather than throw them away, I now use them as blending brushes. You may have noticed a theme here. I'm a big fan of repurposing old tools, and with oil painting, even the roughest, most beat-up brush can find a whole new life in a new role. And when you consider the low price point for a lot of these synthetics, you can really get a lot of value out of them, freeing up your money to buy other things like fancier paints or sable brushes for your detail work. When it comes to palettes, we have a few options. While you could buy a proper artist palette, it's hard to find one in a size suitable for the scale we're working at a reasonable price. Thankfully, what other options we do have are very affordable. Whether you use a square of glass, kitchen tile, or even a piece of cardboard with parchment paper stuck to it, we really don't need much to be effective. Oil paint can be perfectly workable after days of sitting out, so really we're just looking for a surface to hold and mix our paint on, and clean easily if we're not going the disposable route. I started out with cardboard, but later upgraded the tile, as I found it less wasteful and less absorbent. This absorption could be advantageous to you, however, as it does slightly cut down on the drying time of your paint, if that's what you're after. For storage, I use a simple Tupperware container, which helps prevent accidents and will keep your paints active for even longer. A way to even further extend the life of your paint is to pop your palette into the freezer when you're done with the painting session. Depending on the composition of your paint, freezing it will keep many paints going for weeks, and after a few minutes at room temperature, they'll be just as workable as the day you put them in. Now let's move on to thinners and cleaners. In order to get the most out of our paints and brushes, we need both a way to thin our paint for application and a way to keep our brushes clean between painting sessions. As we can't use water for this like we can with acrylics, we instead need a dedicated thinner and cleaner product. There are a lot of different thinners out there, but I recommend this Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner from Speedball, which is an artist grade product that, while not quite odorless, is very mild and affordable, with a 32 ounce or 0.9 litre bottle costing around $15 USD. Another alternative is white spirits, or mineral spirits, which some of you may be familiar with if you've used oil washes over acrylics. While these are also fine, I find them to be quite harsh and can really make a difference when we're using them to paint entire models instead of applying a quick wash. For this reason, I recommend a dedicated artist's thinner. A little bit of thinner goes a long way, and for a painting session I rarely need more than a few mils, enough to fill perhaps a bottle cap. When it comes to cleaner, I like this Winsor & Newton Cleaner and Restorer, which I recommend whether you're painting with oils or acrylic. A 32 ounce bottle can be had for around $30 USD, but like with the thinner, a little goes a long way, and you can get smaller bottles for less. Of the two, the thinner is essential, as without it we won't be able to control the consistency of our paint nor layer it effectively. You may have heard the phrases fat over lean or thick over thin, which refer to the way oil paints behave. Paint with more thinner will adhere to paint with less. This may sound complicated, but in practice it boils down to if your paint isn't sticking, it either needs more or less thinner. You'll see here that while the thinner will absolutely impact the paint job in progress, it's generally safe to use on dried paint or in this case primer. The brush cleaner on the other hand will absolutely destroy any paint that it comes in contact with, which is great for cleaning our brushes, but less so when it comes to spills. If you are going to clean your brushes mid-session, which I often do because I'm too lazy to grab a fresh one, be sure to wring it out with a paper towel thoroughly before grabbing more paint. As you can see, it doesn't take long for it to start eating through this acrylic primer, so I keep mine in a shot glass so that I don't get it confused with my thinner. In case it needs to be said, if you're in the habit of licking your brushes like I once was, painting with oils will quickly cure you of that, one way or the other. The thinner in particular is hazardous, so please look up proper disposal techniques for your area. Lastly, I wanted to spend a few minutes going over some items that you might want to consider. These aren't essential, but are useful in their own right depending on your goals. The first are makeup sponges, which, if you've seen my other videos, I use extensively during the initial stages of painting. They're great for wiping away excess paint during the foundational stage, leaving us with enough to influence our layering. They're also useful for cleanup in general, can be bought in bulk for cheap, and be cut to size to ensure you're getting the most value for your money. Whether you're looking to target specific parts of your miniature, or have decided that you just wanted to start over, you'd be hard pressed to not find a use for these, and if you get one product out of this section, I'd recommend them. Next up we have a small palette knife. These are flexible, durable, and very easy to clean. They're handy if you need to transfer paint between palettes or remove old paint from your existing palette, but are mostly used for mixing paint on the palette. I do tend to use a brush for that, but this tool is more suitable for the job, and for a couple of bucks, they're a good one to have in your arsenal. Then we have pipettes, which I use for transferring cleaner and thinner to their respective containers before a painting session. This helps to prevent spills, which you especially don't want if you're working with the brush cleaner. Like the sponges, they can be bought in bulk and provide a quality of life boost for cheap. Lastly, we have dropper bottles. Like most of the products and techniques in this video, I want to give full credit to James Wapple for putting me onto them. Now these are absolutely optional and will vary in their usefulness depending on your situation and your preference, but the idea behind them is that you add both paint and thinner to these bottles, along with an agitator like these ball bearings from Army Painter, so that you have a staple of pre-thin colours available in a more portable and accessible container. If you're coming from acrylics, these may also ease the transition as they would feel more familiar. They also extend the life of your paint as you have more control over the amount that you use, and the fact that it's pre-thinned means it'll go a little bit farther. Now there is a bit of work in setting these up of course, and I don't use them anymore unless I'm travelling because I'm much more comfortable with the medium and prefer to have the full control over the amount of thinner I use. But they are a great idea and do come with a lot of advantages. And that's about it. Thank you very much for spending time with me here today. I hope this has been helpful and will encourage you to take the plunge into oil painting miniatures. It's a very rewarding way to experience this hobby, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your experiences with it. If you have any questions about any of the products or techniques I've talked about today, or have a topic you'd like me to cover in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. Again, thanks very much for being here, and take care.